Hey guys, welcome to Interesting Bit of Wild Rifts. They're back with a tier list for patch 5.3a. Now obviously since our last tier list, quite a number of things have happened. We have our Kale rework, we have the release of Milio, the release of Heimerdinger, the nerf of Heimerdinger, and of course all of the new Hextech items, of which actually to be honest I think the Hextech Soul Stealer is probably the most significant one. The Black Cleaver is not too big of a deal, the Storm Razor not too big of a deal. Either the Zeeks is pretty nice, but again, also not too big of a deal. So all in all, I think the mages, got the best deal here. But let's start talking about the Baron lane. So firstly, I'm gonna touch on Heimerdinger, one of the new champions. Heimerdinger, of course, we know on release he was completely OP. He was basically permaban after the first 3 days, and now he's gotten a nerf, and honestly, he is still really OP. Like, the nerf is pretty minor, but the main difference is that some people actually stop banning him. I've actually seen him go through the draft a couple of times because people think he's not so strong anymore. Big mistake. He is still really strong. You will see him in the S+ tier in pretty much every role other than the jungle. Honestly, the main issue with Heimerdinger is how much damage his turrets does. Like, not just the base turret, but also the turret lasers. And I will be making Heimerdinger basic guide as well as a complete guide on Heimerdinger, so stay tuned for that. But basically, his turret damage is too high, his laser damage is too high, his W damage is insane as well. He is very safe because you can just use your turrets to generally farm. The main weakness of Heimerdinger is when he doesn't actually have turrets, and the fact that his turret HP is not really that amazing. But honestly, the thing is that even though his HP is not that amazing, it's really difficult to just get rid of his turrets in general. So he does really too much damage, and he's just too safe. So he's just really strong in basically every role. Like in Baron lane, he's not even a Baron laner, but the fact that he's ranged and he's safe, and every Baron laner is basically melee, means it's unplayable into Heimerdinger in the Baron lane. Like if you are fighting Heimerdinger in the Baron lane, what are you supposed to do? You're just gonna get perma pushed in. You can basically farm. You can never really kill him. Even if you get ganked, you may not kill him. If he has the proper turret setup and you get a gank, if he stuns like you and the jungler and the turrets just start firing away at you, you might even just lose 2v1 to Heimerdinger. He's just way too strong, right? So we have him there. Obviously, we have Ambessa gonna be released soon, but obviously she's not out yet, so she can't be in the tier list. If I were to guess, I'd say she probably is gonna be at the top of S+ tier in both the jungle and the Baron lane because of how OP her kit seems to be, but we don't really know. It's just a prediction. Aside from that, I still think that the Jax, Garen, Aatrox are still like some of the strongest Baron laners. In terms of tanks, we have also Ornn and Sion, who are really solid as well. Garen is also kind of a tank, but a little bit more towards the fighter side. We do have, of course, the Black Cleaver changes, which does help them, a little bit. Maybe not Jax, maybe not Sion or Ornn, but it does help Aatrox and Garen quite a little bit. But honestly, they are still strong with or without the Black Cleaver. We also have Mordekaiser, who did take a little bit of a hit in terms of being nerfed, but honestly, I still think he is pretty strong, pretty alright in terms of damage. I moved a couple of champions up a little bit, such as Renekton, which I underestimated him a little bit in the previous patch. Set is also really strong and is pretty popular currently, but he is very punishing if you can't play him properly. Of course, due to the number of tanks in the meta, of course Gwen is also going to be really solid just because she can really eliminate all of those tanks pretty easily with her true damage. Now Panting did get a buff, but I don't think he's that good in the Baron lane just because of who else is in the Baron lane. And look at his matchups with the S+ and S tier champions, they're not very amazing. He's way better in the jungle, which we'll touch on in a while. And Kale did get her rework, but I think in Baron lane her matchups are really horrible. She gets stomped by a majority of Baron laners. And I think she's better in other roles. We'll get to that when we get to the other roles. But let's talk about the jungle. Starting off, let's first touch on the two champions that I was talking about just now, which is Pantheon and Kale. So you will see that I put Kale at the bottom of the A+ tier in the jungle because I think in the jungle she does get a little bit of free reign to farm, because generally you don't get invaded. Generally you can kind of free farm a little bit, but the main issue with Kale in the jungle is that you basically have to give first Herald, first Dragon, and maybe even second Dragon, because you basically don't really want to be in those fights because you're so weak. And the main issue with that is two things. Number one, if your whole team does give away objectives, you're going to basically be losing 3 objectives for free just for you to scale. And when Kale reaches like her skill point, like 3 items level 15 or level 13 in this case, I guess you could say, she's really not even that strong like to give up 3 objectives for that. But number two, what's more likely to happen is your team is going to contest the objectives with or without you, and they're probably going to end up giving kills to the enemy team, and you're not going to get the objective anyway because you are not there as the jungler most likely. So as a result, you're probably just going to not really benefit all that much, which is why I don't put her any higher, but she is really decent in the jungle. Next we have Pantheon. Pantheon, I put him in the higher end of the S tier because I already think Pantheon was a pretty decent jungler before the buff, but after the buff he has a faster clear, he has way better ganks with that insane kind of damage, and basically he just really strong early game. He snowballs himself, snowballs his lane, really dominant in the early to mid game. Single target stun is really busted because you can just lock down a person and they can't really do anything about it. And basically he can of course influence the map as well with his ultimate, which does lead to a lot less punishing situations if you're on the wrong corner of the map. And basically because of that, you are going to generally find success with Pantheon. Now let's take a look at the S plus tier. I still think Viego is really strong despite getting a couple rounds of nerfs, just that you need to actually be good at him to play. Same with Lee Sin. Hecarim is a little bit easier than those two, but still a relatively difficult champion to play, but really really good if you can execute him properly. And finally, we have Vi, which basically is a kind of black horse pick for the S plus tier. However, I do think that Vi is actually really strong, and I've seen a lot of Vi recently. I think she is decently tanky, really insane engage, and does a decent amount of damage. So I actually think Vi deserves to be in the S plus tier. Yeah, just for all of those reasons. Now, Lilia, Xin Zhao, Kha'Zix, and Kayn are still, of course, really strong champions, but Lilia, ever since Liandry's and herself got nerfed, has been a little bit less popular, and the rest of the tier list pretty much, not too many changes. And with that said, let's move on to talking about mid lane. Mid lane, we have a pretty interesting situation, which basically is that Awakened Soul Stealer, or should I say Hextech Soul Stealer, is now pretty much a very OP item, very strong second item on a lot of mages, sometimes even third or fourth depending on who you are. But basically, that item is really OP as long as you can get takedowns. The ability haste and the movement speed you steal is really busted. However, it's a little bit of a feast or famine kind of item, in a sense that if you don't get takedowns, it's really not very useful. And also, every mage has access to it. Like, if you take a look at the S plus and the S tier, pretty much every mage there wants to build this item. Of course, Yasuo, Yone, and Zed don't because they are not mages, but pretty much every mage in the S plus and S tier wants to build it, which in that sense pretty much makes all mages like on par with each other because they all can build the OP item. So Syndra goes to the top of the tier list because she did get a buff on how much stack she can get from her on her passive, and this allows her to reach her evolve faster, and I think that she's really busted ever since she got that change. I still think the Lissandra is actually very strong, but people are starting to play her a lot less now, and there are not actually that many good Lissandra players, although she's really not that hard to play. But she does require a good amount of game knowledge to play, to know when you can go in and when you can't, because she does have a very interesting playstyle of being a squishy, but she does kind of have to hop in to really point and click out somebody and also stun somebody in close range, so it does require a bit of game knowledge. Heimerdinger I still think is really, of course, strong in the mid lane as well. Maybe should be stronger than Lissandra, but obviously in mid lane you can perma push and roam. But the main issue with Heimerdinger is that his roams are not very good, because you do need to set up his turrets when you want to really make plays, and if you just roam, it's really not that good anyway. But the only good thing is you get perma priority, I guess, and he is just a very strong champion in general. Now, the other people you see at the top, like Zoe, Kassadin, Akali, the Wind Brothers, and Zed, as well as pretty much the rest of the S plus and the A plus tier, they're all just pretty much really strong champions that you always see at the high end, of my tier list, and nothing really too interesting to go into detail here. Now, you will notice that I also moved up Kayle. I think Kayle in the mid lane is better than Kayle in the Baron lane because I think her matchups are actually better. Like, for example, if you play Kayle and like you're playing into the Baron lane against like all the Fioras and the Camille's, you're really not gonna have a good time. But for example, if you play Kayle against like Syndra, Lissandra, champions like that, it's really not so bad because they can't really kill you very easily in the early levels unless you continuously take their poke and you actually get yourself into kill range. But aside from that, you're generally going to be fine. You can generally scale. So I think in mid lane it's a lot easier to play Kayle than in the Baron lane. But with that said, let's now move on to ADCs. Now we move on to ADCs, which is my bread and butter, and I still think Varus far and away is the best ADC. He is amazing with on hit. He's amazing, with lethality. He's amazing with AP, and of course you will be seeing all of these in videos either already out or gonna be out, sometime in the future. Because I am spamming a lot of Varus, and I've been doing insane damages with Varus. I just think Varus just has everything you want in the ADC. He has long range, he has percent health damage, he has even anti-heal, he has a team fight CC ability, just really strong. The only thing he really likes is mobility, but of course you can't have everything. And his damage is just insane. So Varus is really insane. Kaisa a little bit similar. Well, she is like an assassin playstyle. She has really good building on hit, crit, as well as AP. So really good build diversity and just really strong in general. Now, the kind of dark horse of ADC is actually Ashe. Now, I actually think Ashe has been underrated criminally for a very long time. Now, I've raised her up pretty much from trash tier all the way to S tier. And now I finally think that the ADC meta has shaped up in a way where Kalista, Ezreal, and Tristana all got nerfed in one way or another, to the point that I actually think Ashe is better than all of them. I actually think Ashe is one of the top ADCs right now that everyone is really underrating quite a bit. And yeah, at one point in time, Ashe used to do completely no damage, but ever since, we had multiple buffs and changes to Ashe over the patches, I actually think Ashe is really hidden OP at the moment, and I really feel the power of Ashe. Now, Xayah and Heimerdinger are barely hanging on to S+ tier, and I think Xayah did get an indirect buff from that kind of change in the AD, like removing her base AD and giving her scaling instead. I did think that's an indirect buff, actually, and I actually think Xayah is actually just pretty strong, but again, you kind of have to play into a team that wants to run into you. If you're playing into like a long-range team with people like Ziggs and Varus, Xayah isn't really that strong, but in majority of situations, Xayah is going to be strong and just really irritating to play against. If you're playing against Xayah, you know what I'm talking about. And Heimerdinger, again, he's a really OP champion. I am going to be releasing a bot lane Heimerdinger guide really soon, and I have played him, and he works in bot lane just as well as any other lane. And yeah, he's just pretty strong. So Ezreal and Tristana are kind of like former S+ tier champions, and the issue is that they had a lot of their early game power kind of taken away, and that's where they really used to shine. It's a lot harder to get kills in lane now. Of course, it's not impossible. It's still pretty alright, but it's a lot harder than last time. Again, Caitlyn, I think I always think Caitlyn's a little bit weird for me because generally she is strong, but I just don't really enjoy playing Caitlyn that much. I really don't think she's that good compared to a lot of other ADCs, but I have to admit that objectively speaking, she is still a really good ADC, especially for beginners, with her very long range, her ability to bully, and her ability to generally be safe, having a dash on her E as well. So she is still a really decent champion. Kalista did get a huge nerf in terms of her early game damage, and because of that, I did move her like barely hanging onto the S tier, but I still think you can carry. I still think if you have the mechanics for it, Kalista is still a very strong champion. As you either have seen or will see in my Kalista, updated complete guide. Now, sometimes I say that because I know I already have the gameplay, and I actually already recorded the video, but I'm not sure if this video or that video is going to come out first, which is why I say like, either you have seen or will see in the Kalista video. I actually moved Sivir up because after playing Sivir, I actually think she's a little bit better than what I actually kind of thought. And yeah, Jhin is not really in the best of spots right now. Vayne, again, as I say, not very strong because a lot of on-hit champions, even though on-hit did get nerfed in this patch, is just better than Vayne. And I still think the worst champions are MF and Twitch. MF, of course, did get a little bit better after the buff she received in this patch, but not completely game-breaking in my opinion. I might be underrating her. We'll have to see as the current patch and next patch unfolds, because it generally takes time for people to really adapt to the changes, but we'll have to really see about that. So all that said about ADC, let's talk about support now. So finally we have support, and obviously again Heimerdinger is completely OP, so even in the support role, even with the lack of gold, his turrets and all is just really strong in general. Like what can I say, right? It's just really good. Melio, we haven't had him in the tier list yet, but in my personal opinion, Melio is just really busted. Like, even with the nerfs on the W range and such, I really just think Melio is just very, very strong. And if you really need examples of it, just look at like my Sivir updated complete guide that's already released. Look at the Jinx updated complete guide that's already released. Like, in those matches, without Melio, we straight up just lose. Like, range is a broken stand on ADCs. This is why ADCs have the ranges that they do, because if they had ranges that are too long, they would be able to free hit and no one can really catch them other than assassins that come from a flank. So if you have a support that gives your ADC extra range, on some champions like like Jinx, like Sivir, like Caitlyn, and like really majority of ADCs, if you give them extra range, they're just gonna be at a safety level in terms of distance between themselves and their opponent. Of course, assuming that the ADC is good and plays optimally, that just should never be the case. And yeah, I honestly just think Melio is really busted. Like, he does decently at protecting an ADC because of his E shield, as well as the disengage from his ball, the cleanse from his CC, and obviously the range we've talked about extensively. Now, I think Lulu is a similar or better or worse form of Melio depending on the matchup, but Lulu protects an ADC better than Melio, but obviously doesn't give the range. Maokai, I still think, is probably the best engaged support because he has point and click. Karma is a good mix between damage and support because she does give really good shields and speed ups, but she also does insane damage on her Q, especially if you have Illudens. The other really good enchanters are, of course, Lux, Soraka, as well as Yuumi, and other really good engagers or catchers are, of course, Rakan, Leona, as well as Pyke. Leona, especially with the new Zeeks, and Rakan as well can build Zeeks, is actually really potent because you can allow your allies to catch up to you when you proc the Zeeks. Of course, other engaged supports can do the same, like Alistar, Nautilus, Thresh, etc. But I just think they aren't really as strong as Leona or Rakan. But with all that said, we finally reached the end of our tier list, yeah, that's going to be it for the tier list for this patch. Of course, we're going to be having a new tier list either the next patch or the patch after that, depending on how much the meta changes. So thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.